everyone, it's Alliestrasza here. So Theros Beyond Death is the first set of 2020 that we're going to see released for Magic the Gathering. I've been playing a lot of MTGA, so I thought that I would do a top 10 cards that I think will be most powerful, we'll see a lot of play in the year to come. So I hope you guys enjoy. So to start, we've got Dryad of the Elysian Grove. It's a green creature, 3 costed for 2/4 in stats. So right off the bat, we can say that its stat line is pretty solid for a 3 costed creature. 4 toughness means that it should be a little bit harder to kill in the early game, and that's really good because it has 2 pretty strong passive abilities. One of these abilities is that you get to add an extra land card to the battlefield each turn, including the turn that you play it. So it can sort of act like a 3-mana Arboreal Grazer, except for in the case of the Dryad, it actually comes into play untapped, unlike the case of Grazer. In addition to that ability, the Dryad actually makes all of your lands every basic land type. So other than the fact that that's absolutely amazing for color fixing, there's a lot of cards in Standard that can really take advantage of this ability. So the first one that comes to mind that can really capitalize on that ability is, of course, our girl who shakes the world, Nissa. The fact that these lands are technically deemed as forests, meaning that you can tap each land for 2 mana, is absolutely incredible synergy with the Dryad. But there are other cards that could work really well with the Dryad, like, for example, Dread Presence, which benefits from dropping a land every single turn. So the fact that you're able to double up on Dread Presence abilities is pretty good. The next card we're going to talk about is Heliod, Uncrowned, so the white god. Now, he's been getting a ton of attention, mainly because of the implications that they have on Pioneer and Modern. And if you've been following it closely, you might already know some of the combinations that can be done with him, but just in case you don't know, I'm going to go over them real quick. So in Pioneer, he is part of a 2-card infinite combo that revolves around removing counters from a card called Walking Ballista that you've used the Heliod to give lifelink to. Once the Ballista has lifelink, you can remove a counter and ping your opponent, causing you to gain life and replace the counter that you just used. So you can just do this infinitely until your opponent is dead. In Modern, you can do this as well with an even cheaper version, which revolves just around gaining infinite life with a card called Spike Feeder. Remove a counter, gain 2 life, then replace the counter and gain infinite life. To make this combo even more consistent, you can grab both Spike Feeder and Heliod off of a card called Collected Company, getting both of the cards into the battlefield at the same time, making this combo easier to perform. As for Standard, it's a little less clear of where he will fit in right away, but he certainly has the makings to be a very powerful card. He has an amazing stat line for one of the gods, and there are a lot of cards in Standard right now that have a lot of incidental life gain here and there, so I could see potentially a shell of a deck being built around Heliod himself. Next up, we've got Klothys, God of Destiny, so the red and green god. Taking a look at him right away, we can see he's probably a pretty versatile card here. In addition to the Graveyard Disruption, which is probably going to be pretty important with the escape cards that are going to be running around, it looks like he can provide some ramp for red and green decks and also some extra reach to kill your opponent. It takes a bit more devotion to get him active than the other gods, but it also could be a little bit easier because you can use the combined colors to complete the devotion. You can pair Klothys with a card like Fabled Passage to get a little bit more of guaranteed value from his ramp ability. Unfortunately though, if you are playing on curve, you will have a land come into play tapped because of the Fabled Passage. In a set with a lot of graveyard mechanics, I think Klothys is a welcome addition, as I mentioned earlier, for some of those pesky escape cards that we're bound to see. Next up, we've got Crocs, Titan of Death's Hunger. So Crocs is one of the titans of this set. And the titans have 2 modes. So the first one is they get an enter the battlefield effect, but then you are required to sacrifice the creature. The second is you get to bring it back for its escape cost, so you get the enter the battlefield effect, and you also get to keep the creature on the board. In Crocs' case, the effect is making your opponent discard, which for 2 mana is not that great on its own. But one nice thing though is that if your opponent chooses to discard a land, which people often do, they actually take 3 life as well. With the escape tacked on, this card can provide some serious card advantage, but it gets even more powerful when you add in some really powerful synergies that work very well with it. So for example, in the already very popular Rakdos Sacrifice deck, or some people call it Sakdos, this card finds a very nice home. In response to the trigger, which makes you sacrifice it going on the stack, you can actually use another card's sacrifice effect, like Witch's Oven, to sack it instead of just itself. So in the case of sacking it with Witch's Oven, you can get 2 food tokens instead of none at all. This also works with Priest of the Forgotten Gods or a card like Fling, which requires sacrifice as you cast it. It's also worth noting that this card activates the discard ability whenever it attacks, so it's a threat that absolutely needs to be answered by your opponent, which is why it makes this list for my top 10 cards. The next Titan on this list is Uro, Titan of Nature's Wrath. So if Simic wasn't powerful enough going into this set, Uro definitely kicks it up a notch. He provides another Growth Spiral effect with his regular cast, with the added benefit of 3 life on top of it. And once you've finished ramping, he escapes, giving you another card draw and life. Not to mention the 6/6 on the board that threatens to attack for more life and cards. While you can do similar shenanigans in responding to the sacrifice trigger like we did with Crocs, I like the synergy between Uro and Cavalier of Thorns a little bit better for the blue-green decks. If you haven't already put a Uro in the graveyard by the time that you cast the Cavalier can help you find a Uro to escape. And if you already have put one in the graveyard, the Cavalier just adds fuel to the fire to get the escape going as soon as possible. The next card on the list is Nyxbloom Ancient. So if you thought Nissa making your lands tap for twice as much mana was pretty strong, well, Nyxbloom Ancient makes your permanents that tap for mana tap for 3 times as much. While this is more expensive and fragile than Nissa because it can be killed by creature card removal, it's still incredibly powerful. It's not hard to imagine all the different ways that you can end the game with this card, whether that be like a giant Hydra or some of the finale cards, X-cost burn spells, and I'm sure there are plenty of others. Now, Nyxbloom Ancient might be a little too slow, but I decided to add it because I could also see it being the perfect way for ramp decks to really close out a game. Next up, Underworld Breach, so a 2-mana red enchantment. Underworld Breach should make for a pretty powerful engine for many red decks. It can simply be an endgame buyback of a few spells that you really want to get another cast of, or a combo card with other more expensive escape cards. Take Crocs, for instance. With Underworld Breach, you can cast it for a much cheaper escape cost of 1 red and 1 black and exile only 3 cards, versus 2 reds and 2 blacks and exiling 5 other cards. It still counts as though it is escaping, so you get to keep the creature. If you combine this with 1 or 2 cheap spells, you have an extremely powerful turn in the making. Next up is Shadowspear. So Shadowspear feels like the sweet spot for an equipment card. It's not overly powerful, but it provides a lot of good utility for how inexpensive it is. Overall, I'm expecting Shadowspear to appear in some decks, whether that be in the main or more likely in the sideboard. Trample and Lifelink feel particularly relevant in a meta that's dominated by cats and ovens, and the activatable of this card is pretty nice to deal with those indestructible gods that are bound to show up in decent numbers over the next standard season. Next is Elspeth, Sun's Nemesis. So Elspeth is one of the main characters from Theros Beyond Death, and as such, she gets a powerful Planeswalker card as well. I think Elspeth works best as a curve topper for an aggro deck, which allows you to refuel a board after a Wrath effect, or this could give a serious power boost to an unanswered board. Once you've gotten a few uses out of her, you can escape her later to keep up the pressure. The ability for her to close out games and act as a continuous value engine probably will make her a force to be reckoned with, and hopefully she can bring a little bit of balance to the color pie, as white seems like it hasn't had too much time to shine in the last couple standard seasons. Lastly, we've got Gray, Merchant of Asphodel. Now, I wasn't around last time this card was printed in the original Theros set, but apparently he was part of such a powerful archetype that he earned this affectionate nickname called Gary. So some people think that this reprint means that we will have another really strong Black Devotion archetype, and I think that they could be right. Good old Gary here has quite the strong ability to end games by siphoning all of your opponent's life, so I'm really looking forward to trying out Gary and seeing how this Black Devotion deck goes. All right, folks, there you have it. Those are my top 10 cards from Theros Beyond Death. And I will say that limiting this list to 10 cards was actually pretty difficult, so it's very likely that I missed a lot of cards that will see a ton of play in Standard, but that is okay. I tried to do a good mix of enchantments and planeswalkers and creatures to make it a little bit different, and this is what I came up with. So if I did miss anything outrageous, please let me know in the comments, and just let me know what you thought of the video in general. Shout out to the YouTube fam. Thank you guys so much for watching my content, and for those of you that do watch Twitch, I will be, of course, streaming the new expansion Theros Beyond Death on my Twitch channel. So thank you guys so much for checking out this video, and I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day.